Today's guest is John Wu, the president of Ava Labs. Ava Labs is the team building out the Avalanche blockchain and has been on the frontier as one of the leading chains bringing institutions from TradFi to DeFi. And with the changing regulatory environment, there might be more opportunity on this front. So we are excited to have John on to discuss that and a lot more. John, welcome to the show.
Jackie, Eleanor, Gerald, thank you for having me. Always a pleasure speaking with you guys.
Oh, thanks. And to start off, we always like to ask our guests, what does crypto in America mean to you? And we had Emin answer this too, so it'll be interesting to see how the answers differ.
Well, I mean, as an American, I'm glad that innovation and the capital related to crypto is going to come back onshore with better regulation. Some of the worst things we saw was that the developers and other innovators were leaving U.S. soil in order to do what they do. And we're seeing the trend reverse right now. And we're also seeing capital come back onshore, especially with the Genius Act and other things that have been done to give more clarity and a friendly environment for development. So just like the internet, just like AI, the reason why U.S. leads innovation is because there are people who are able to innovate and the capital markets are deep to allow them the funding they need. So we got to bring all that back. And when it's onshore, we can lead in crypto as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you speak about onshoring, and we've had a lot of guests on the podcast in the last couple of months who have come back to the U.S. after feeling like they were persecuted and had to leave under the prior administration. But I'm curious, as you're one of Ava Labs' core officials, and you've probably been to DC a couple times in the last couple months or so. How has that relationship between your team and the administration changed over time? How have you?
Yeah. Yep, I have been. It's changed in a very interesting respect because it feels like more of a dialogue. Before, when you go down there, it was more like an inquisition and it was one way. But I think there is a healthy balance now and a genuine interest in understanding pros and cons and listening to the developers and the builders in the space.
So, John, we mentioned, interviewing, this summer, I guess, it's time flies. And so I don't think Genius had actually passed yet. You can fact check me on the timeline, but obviously a lot has happened in DC as far as the legislation, the policy moving forward. What are some of the things that you are excited about with where we are with market structure and obviously the passing of Genius? And what are some of the things that you see kind of hanging up the industry in DC these days?
So, Dr. Eamon Gunseer, you're the CEO and founder, president of Ava Labs, the team behind Avalanche. We've always had the mission of not just building out the ecosystem for crypto native applications, but we really wanted to. That's why we're in New York to use the technology and apply it to traditional real world use cases, whether it be in finance, in TradFi, or in other enterprises and Web2. So having the regulation of stablecoins and potentially market structure, which I think will happen at some point, really is basically liftoff for many of the regulated participants as well as in traditional large enterprises because they don't want to dance around gray area. They want to know for sure that everything's okay. When you're a big behemoth, you're not going to risk your business for some gray area on a little piece. You're going to wait for clarity. And hopefully that will be even more clear by the end of the year or early next year with market clarity for the structure built.
When you talk to these enterprise businesses, I know you're in a lot of the conversations with institutions and then the enterprises and all these different categories that are essentially outside of crypto. And I know you have a background outside of crypto as well, and we'll get into that later. But I'm curious from your perspective, when you're having these conversations, do you find that they are more comfortable with it now to the point that you're talking about because there is this regulatory clarity coming in and they actually feel like, okay, now there's guidelines, we could operate with this, whereas before it was like, we don't know whether or not we can? Actually,
simple answer, absolutely. Before they were doing, call it trials or test nets or things just to understand the technology. So they had a good understanding before regulation that if you can unify the rails of value and data, you can create a lot of business value for yourself and cost savings. So we are seeing it with a lot of brands, call it. I mean, we've worked with companies that service the Cleveland Cavaliers, perfect example. And once you actually have verifiable data and value can move around. You can create a loyalty rewards program that is smart, programmable, and engage the user. So the Cleveland Cavaliers literally in a very short period of time have created a new revenue stream. We're talking about millions of dollars. So, in the grand scheme of things, not huge, but it's high margin and it's a whole brand new revenue stream. And more importantly, it's a lot of direct engagement. I call that, the DTC stuff. The brands and the sports teams are creating DTC, direct to consumer or customer experiences. And what they're finding out in these brands particularly is not only do they have more engagement with their existing fan base, and because it's verifiable data on the transactions as well as knowing the people that's in the ecosystem or community, they don't have to go and buy advertising to reacquire existing fans. So it's almost like a great CRM tool, and it's going to change how advertising is done in the long run as well. That's a perfect example of how, going back to your question, Gerald, about how, the value being moved from one place to another and clarity on the rules of doing that has enabled the viewpoints of various large enterprises.
Yeah, John, I'm curious about that because before we started recording, we were talking about is crypto still cool? In the context of what the kids are into these days. And I'm curious, like with all these enterprise use cases, these large partnerships, we see TradFi coming on, institutional finance. You've been in the space for a long time. Do you think we're getting into that, like crypto is boring and that's a good thing? Or like, how do you think about kind of where we are, in the cycle here as far as tech goes?
Yeah. I mean, as you guys know, I was a technology investor prior to becoming an operator. And, I pride myself on finding emerging technologies early, first as an investor and now as an operator. I think yes, I think you're going to start losing the early builders and developers who by nature want the excitement of something that's very volatile, that's uncertain, and they are creating something that is like going to change things, as opposed to another set of people who are more like they get their, juices flowing when it's about running a certain rail much better or more efficiently or faster. This is classic 0 to 1 type thinker versus 1 to 10 type thinker. 0 to 1 is big vision, change things, flexible in your thinking, and, call it, 2 to 10 is more, as you further mature you get, it's more about how efficient you can do things, how well you can do things, as opposed to change things. So I don't think we're there yet, Gerald, but this is the beginning of that stage. And I actually even think about it when we hire people at, Ava Labs. Basically, you can't hire the same type of person because our business has grown and it's big now. There's a lot of people. So you can't have that same type of, unfortunately, sometimes entrepreneurial spirit. And you have to hire people who are more process oriented, if you will.
I think I like entrepreneurial spirit more than degen, which I think is the
it's a different type.
But,
yeah.
Well, it happens in every industry. It's not just crypto. We were talking about how there's serial entrepreneurs. That's because some people just know that they love 0 to 1. They're good at 0 to 1 and they don't enjoy, 1 to 10.
You mentioned making crypto cool again. I feel like you guys have done that in a sense of, you've honed in on the sports partnerships, and with FIFA coming up, with the World Cup coming up next year, you can't get much cooler than that, in sense of like, kids who love soccer, right? I'm curious to know, like, are you seeing any traction from like FIFA fans using Avalanche? Are people actually like interacting with the on-chain collectibles and the apps that you guys have rolled out? And like, how are you preparing, I guess, for next year? It's going to be like a total onslaught of stuff going on because the World Cup's coming to the US for the very first time, or the first time in a long time, I believe.
So I'm very glad, Ellen, that you brought that up because we're very proud of the FIFA relationship. In terms of traction, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the Swiss boards is actually suing FIFA for doing what they're doing too well. So that's testament to basically the traction that they're getting. And we're very excited about this because next year when this happens, they've already embedded certain cool things into this, NFT loyalty program, which is the right to buy seats. We all know that how hard it is to get the tickets at call it face value. So they're embedding into this, the ability to get access to buy seats depending on your team, your favorites. Again, creating that fan engagement way ahead of time. And that's unfortunately what the Swiss, I forget the name of the agency, it has an issue with. And, but that's a testament to how much traction is already happening.
Bitcoin might sound complicated, but the Gemini credit card makes it simple. Use it like any credit card. Buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. No annual fee, and right now you can grab a $200 Bitcoin intro bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stash. Go to gemini.com/CIA to learn more. Terms apply.
Also on that note, John, I mean, obviously FIFA is a global sport and it's cool that they're coming to America. And I was thinking as Eleanor was talking and you too, is like the difference between like stateside growth versus global growth when you think about the Avalanche technology expansion, right? So with FIFA in mind, but then also like other advancements, how do you kind of think about the US audience? Is it more accessible than previous years? And then on the other flip side, like what do you think about the global audience? And are there specific like regions that you're really trying to tap into?
Yeah, Jackie, that's a great question because if you see some of our recent announcements, there's been a lot of stuff in Japan. We just announced a huge partnership with TIS. TIS is the Japanese equivalent. It's a hybrid of Accenture and Stripe and Plaid all in one. And they're going to be launching an Avalanche L1 to create tokenization of stablecoins as well as assets for various banks in that constituency. It's a public company as well. So it's been a long-term partner. You saw our stuff with MapleStory, which is the Nexon, another publicly traded company in Japan. And this is a game, MapleStory. And now there's an instance of it on Avalanche that has well over 220 million users historically. It's been around for 25 years and has generated over $5 billion of revenue for Nexon. So to answer your question is part of the reason why these things you're seeing internationally from Ava Labs is because those, it takes a long time to do enterprise stuff. A long time for the sales process, a long time for the education, a long time for them to buy into it and then to test it. This is like the tail wagging the dog. All the stuff you're seeing is because the last 2-3 years, we had to go further offshore to do a lot of the stuff. What you're going to see in a year or so is all the stuff we're working on now in the US. So the short answer is yes, we're seeing far more activity in the US now because of the Genius Act. But as the Clarity Act or the Market Structure Act gets put into place, you're going to see, I would anticipate a huge explosion of activity as well.
What are those projects that you're working on in the US? You teed up that question perfectly, John. Honestly, we were going to ask about, the enterprise and government partnerships that you guys have done and what you see is driving the most utility behind, not just speculation, but those real world use cases in the US.
Yeah, great. I mean, I know you're referring to either the stablecoin for the state of Wyoming or the land registries in New Jersey
DMV ones,
or the California DMV. So those are, unbelievable projects and things that we're working on with real world utility or use case. I'll break it down, I think, in 3 categories that people don't usually think about. One is just big enough. It's called institutional finance. All the stuff we've done in that space, whether it's tokenizing Apollo's ACRED or, the TIS relationship in Japan, those things. We've been doing that for a long time. That was part of our core mission. But the direct-to-consumer is really where people don't realize that there's a lot of activity as brands and sports teams, stadiums, the Red Bull Stadium, we have a deal with those guys. They are realizing, again, what I said before, that you can get better using the blockchain, the programmability of it, and aligning that with the value transfer in a cheap way. Not only would you save costs, but you're going to have better contact with your user and have more engagement and really more wallet share, if you will. And also you save money for them and you because you're using a stablecoin to affect the loyalty and royalty stuff. And then there's new ones coming. We have this partnership with a company called Even. Do you guys know what Even is? Even is like a mini Spotify. So one of the biggest problems in the creator economy, unless you're Taylor Swift for singer-songwriters, is the existing value chain is so monopolized by certain players that unless you are a massive hit like Taylor Swift, you can't really, your piece of the pie gets split by so many people. If you have a community, and Even has 500,000 wallets and I think now hundreds of thousands of creators already. Most of the music is in one genre, by the way, but apparently like J. Cole's is very huge there and some other stars are on it. You're suddenly able to have, again, direct engagement with your user base. So if you have a community already, you can use Even, and suddenly that engagement, your fan is there, and you can actually have more direct-to-consumer, direct capture of the value you're creating. And they've cited numbers where like you need 26 million streams to make the same dollar that you can make on,
Crazy.
a similar amount of time on Even. So that's like call it mini Spotify, using blockchain rails and having the unified experience of value, engagement, and verified, data and transactions all in one.
John, you mentioned the Wyoming stable token. I remember the announcement. I think we talked about this during our episodes at SALT, because that whole thing came out right around that time. But
Yep.
I remember there was a little snafu around actually rolling it out to the public. Has there been an update on that where customers are actually allowed to transact with that now?
Well, I have to get updated on that, frankly, but
Okay.
I think things are probably solved. And the problem with that stuff, it's also because it's one state versus many states, so it's not clear if they solved it or not. But I think if you're within Wyoming and you're using certain merchant point of sales stuff, it's not that big a problem.
John, I want to take us in a slightly different direction, hopefully not get too down in the weeds here, but something that's really interesting to me about the way Avalanche is built is, we're talking about building on chain, but you guys are actually several chains. It's not like Solana or, Say, where it's, you have the platform chain with the subnets, you have the contract chain and the exchange chain. How do conversations with enterprises or DeFi or, the Cleveland Cavaliers go when you have that like flexible architecture? Do you think that's a big attracting like point to some of your partners, or like how does that work as you guys go to market?
Absolutely. So yes, for simplicity's sake, it's a network of chains all tied together. And call it the main chain, the Avalanche main chain, where a lot of the DeFi happens and more crypto native stuff happens. Almost think of that as the existing pool, that it's kind of like early stage companies. It's easier to launch because the composability and the permissionless aspect of blockchain and crypto allow you, if you want to do something in lending and borrow, to take advantage of the stablecoins that exist there, or the AMMs that exist there, or even if you want to do NFTs or memes or whatever, it allows you to access the existing, dApps there and tap into the liquidity and share the validation and staking that's existing with everyone else. However, if you are a large institution and you bring an ecosystem with you, you may want to just have your own. I know they used to be called subnet, but they're called L1s now. Your own blockchain, because you already have a community. You don't need that on-ramp, so to speak. And then you want to customize that purposeful layer one blockchain, because if you can program the substrate, your application on the top layer is more efficient to your end user as well. And so you may want your own thing, but they're all interoperable. So you want access to the pool when you want access to the pool. Or you may be a financial institution and you have to contain it because of compliance reasons and regulatory reasons. And you have to KYC AML in a certain way, and you want to dictate who's in the network. So you want to close loop it in an L1, but your thinking is, when rules are clear or down the line, when there's new technology, I want to be able to have easy access into the broader permissionless world. You can almost like turn a switch and go into the broader permissionless world. And then the great thing about Avalanche, it's EVM compatible. So assets on one hop can move back and forth between Avalanche and Ethereum stuff easily. So I think, to answer your question, it's something we thought of, and we felt like at some point the generalized L1s will not suit for every purpose or every use case, and for different sizes of companies or developers. So this is why it's such a flexible architecture and chain. It can, some people like to say it's the everything chain, or, the mooch likes to say it's a Swiss Army knife, because it's easy for the 2-person development team, but also a giant publicly traded Japanese corporation can also create their necessary bespoke requirements.
Yeah, John, while you were talking, I was thinking about like how many Avalanche L1s are there now? And so I looked at the Token Relations Avalanche weekly newsletter that we write for you guys, and it is 383. And if they're wrong, we got to go fire some people. But that's how many total Avalanche L1s there are. And I remember back in the day, there was like 45, like a long time ago. And so obviously, like, it's compounding, it's growing. My question here is twofold. One, how many Avalanche L1s are you really hoping that there does become, let's say within like the next year? Is there a certain like target you have? And then two, when you talk to these enterprise businesses or even institutions, like, do they want to build an Avalanche L1? Is that on their mind, or they just want to use the technology in a different capacity?
I'll answer the second question first,
Sure.
the large institutions. Part of it is the technology and being able to have it created in a purposeful way for their specific needs. So their end, application up the stack of the tech stack is easier to use for their customers. But the other part is, again, it's like the Ava Labs team was built with industry vertical experts that can service from a business development perspective, as well as from a technology integration perspective. A lot of these large enterprises, obviously they have a heavy war chest. If they want to build their own blockchain, they could. And banks like JP Morgan do that, right? But if they don't want to build their own blockchain, they need tech integration. We have Ava Cloud that helps them do that. And we have business development people that speak their language and can program the business logic into the chain itself. So your second question was, how did the enterprises think about it and why they choose the Avalanche L1? It's the technology, it's the business development expertise in that vertical. We have vertical experts in all of these places. And also call it like the Accenture-like integration into the Avalanche ecosystem. Literally, part of the reason why even that, call it mini Spotify, chose Avalanche L1s, because we have not yet announced, but like a lot of music related stuff, and our people there are somewhat connected to the music industry, and that only helps.
Right. So how many Avalanche L1s? You didn't answer my other question.
Oh, sorry, I forgot about this. You asked 2 or 3 questions at one time.
I know. It was a trap. Yeah.
I mean, I think your numbers are right. How many do we service or want?
No, how many do you want to see?
Yeah. I mean, we want to see as many as possible, but I think in the law of business, there's always the power law. Ultimately, a few will generate most of the transactions, most of the stuff. But I think, again, this to Gerald's question earlier, the space is still new enough that even FIFA or some of these large players are still experimenting with how to engage with their customers and what features to turn on and off. So it's still in the early stages.
And then on the institutional side, we keep talking about it, like tokenization and RWAs and stablecoins, whether with you or other guests, everyone's talking about it. John, you come from a traditional financial world too. I know you said you were a tech investor. So you have good insight into this category. What do you think American institutions want to do with this whole behemoth today of like tokenization, RWAs, and I'll even throw stablecoins in there, although I think that's kind of separate. But maybe tokenization and RWAs. We'll put those two together.
Well, I mean, Larry Fink and Jamie Dimon literally just talked about this a day or two ago, and something I've been saying for 8 years, that everything will be tokenized at some point. And I think Larry Fink's, I don't know the exact words, that's paraphrasing it. So I don't know how much more validation that this will be coming than when you have two behemoths like those guys saying that they are, even Jamie Dimon is agreeing to that this is going to happen. It's just a matter of when. It's an evolution. It's not going to happen overnight. Well, what I do think is going to happen in the short term is we've already seen stablecoins usage as payments, not necessarily as on-chain exchange settlement for trading purposes, increased dramatically. I think 40 or 50%. There was a good report by the team at Artemis, and they printed it recently, where they cited how much stablecoin activity there is for just payment. And a lot of that payment in the short term is B2B and is, international corresponding bank related. And it's done by the PSPs. And I think that is the most immediate disintermediation, because the costs for moving money cross-border is insane right now, on the enterprise level down to the individual level. Individual level, obviously, the MoneyGrams of the world and the remittance people are still extracting a lot of their Schumpeterian rents, if you will. And even in the cross-border company-to-company world, spreads are still costs are 6%, 3 to 5 days in terms of finalizing things. Whereas we know with the technology wrapper of a stablecoin, you can do things almost instantly, and you take prices down to, basis points, if you will.
Yeah, John, I just wanted to follow up on that. You mentioned, someone actually on my panel yesterday, I was here for Government Blockchain Association's event here in DC. And someone on my panel mentioned that, there's all this talk about, the rush to modernize finance, right? That was actually the topic of our panel. And as Jacqueline said too, there's this, all this talk about institutions coming in, stablecoins are the hot topic, tokenizing real world assets, really kind of ripping out the old plumbing that these institutions have run on for so long and putting in the new. But really, for blockchains to be considered institutional grade, like these TradFi companies are not comfortable with the current, I think, standard that we have at the moment, and they have to meet a much more sort of rigorous criteria, for putting those in at some point. When it comes to really seeing that migration. How are you guys thinking about that at Avalanche and potential partnerships with these institutions, and how long could something like that take? Is my question, because so much talk, but when will we see it happen?
Well, don't forget, AI was around for 40 years before ChatGPT, and people thought, ChatGPT was the, opening of AI to the world. But that was just the moment that, it was so obvious to the average user that it's possible. So all of these things are overnight successes after many, many years. It's actually really more of a evolution than it is a revolution, if you will. So in terms of how do we look at the world? There's no doubt in my mind, just like there is Venmo and then there's Zelle, which is done by the banks. There will always be parallel universes where there is a third party, like an Avalanche, where there is enterprises that want to develop things through that methodology. But if you are a JP Morgan and you have effectively limitless resources with their balance sheet, you may want to control the entire stack and do everything yourself. And you have a network that's gigantic. JP Morgan itself is network all over the world. So, all the benefits I talked about before, they already have internally, and they will, they have the scale to actually hire the people and create connexus, what they have, and do the JP Morgan coin. So I think history will rhyme, and there will always be, parallel paths, and it's going to be dependent on the size, the firm, and the willingness to basically adapt things.
Yeah, John, I love the comment about AI. I remember my venture days. That's my background as well. In 2018, the joke was 3, Stanford PhDs start a machine learning company and get acquired by Google for $100 million, 3 days later. So I do think I forget who said it, but slowly and then all at once, right? I want to switch gears a little bit. I think the tokenization topic is obviously very timely, but we've been talking on this show for a while about what will happen faster. And I think it's interesting to be talking during the week of all these ETF announcements, and we've had updated standards there. The question was, okay, so we're going to have tokenized assets. We're going to have your Apple shares, as a token, and NASDAQ's going to run on rails and all that kind of stuff. But on the other side of this, and what's probably pretty important for, a project like you guys, is taking the token or the digital assets and putting it in sort of traditional equity wrappers, right? And so you guys had a couple digital asset treasuries announced. You mentioned the Mooch earlier. I saw, he's obviously chairing one and a friend of the show as well. So very exciting. What do you think about the role that these publicly listed vehicles with your assets in them has on your project or the ecosystem or how you think about this?
Yeah, these public, call it asset wrappers, whether it's an ETF or a DAT, and they're different. I think they're very important because they're distribution vehicles. And they, basically I've gone to TradFi conferences where other than Bitcoin and Ethereum, they really don't know anything else that exists. And they definitely, if they even know the names, they don't really know what's the difference or how it works or any of that. So these DATs and the ETFs, the asset wrappers, if you will create far more awareness to the average person. And they serve kind of a different purpose as opposed to tokenizing, Anthony's Skybridge fund that we helped do, or tokenizing, a Parafy fund or a Apollo private credit fund or the BIDL for BlackRock. That's a asset that's different and doesn't have necessarily right now the same distribution for sure as an ETF or a DAT.
Yeah. I think on that note too, though, I'm wondering from your perspective, John, what will it take for when you do go to these conferences and you say, I'm the president of Ava Labs, we help build out Avalanche. People don't look at you like, huh, what's that? Because like in our world, everyone knows what Avalanche is, but you're saying in the external worlds, not everyone knows what these things are. And I hear this all the time too. Like people understand now Bitcoin institutions. They're starting to get Ethereum, and then everything else is like, it's up in the air whether or not they know. And I highly doubt they do for the most part.
Right. Well, I think in a weird way, it's all, everyone's working towards abstraction. And ultimately, the blockchain underneath is really kind of like Intel inside in the old days or whatever, whether it's an iOS for your Apple or an Android for your Google phone. It just like, that's the thing, that's what things run on, and it will never get as popular as whatever touches the user in many ways. And so in a strange way, it's kind of like we're working towards abstraction of the brand or the thing, which is a weird thing to say. So I don't know if they'll ever get as aware as a consumer products thing. But again, like, think about it. Like the average consumer doesn't know that Stripe or Plaid has made their life a lot easier. They just know the bank they go to and deposit money.
Yeah. It could be more of like a fun thing where you say like, oh, that's actually running on Avalanche. And then they're like, oh, no way,
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember you guys were kind of ahead of the curve on this on the institutional side as well. I think it was maybe Consensus 2023, the launch of Evergreen. Yeah. And I went to that event and it was all asset managers. Like the entire thing was. So my question is how being there early, and then obviously 2023 was a very interesting year for the industry for a lot of reasons. And then coming to where we are now, how have you seen a shift, from maybe that initial curiosity to, hey, what can we build with you?
Yeah. Well, it went from even before that. Yeah. As Jackie knows, and you guys all know, I've been around the space for a long time. It went from like dismissive to curiosity to then trials, test nets, whatever you want to call it, beta stuff in order to understand it, to I think right now, which is like, okay, we understand it. We've done the evergreens or the spruces and all of that stuff. Where is the liquidity? In fairness, there's a lot of tokenization of real world assets, but the trading is not necessarily happening like it does in DeFi or somewhere else. And it's also, can the laws be clear yet? Like even with the Genius Act, which has made it good on the federal macro level, if you will, the specifics or the micro level is still being discussed. And the Market Clarity or the Market Structure Act, the Clarity Act, will ultimately lend more information to allowing stablecoins to take off to another level. We're talking about what exactly can be in the reserves, how can it be audited, all of those stuffs, and who can get the licenses, and is there yield allowed right now? No yield, to separate deposits, so the banks have a purpose. All of the details and the specifics still have to be worked out, even though on the big picture, it's allowed. So, I think Artemis cited that 40% increase in this year already in stablecoin payments, not necessarily just on-chain transactions for trading. I think that's going to take off even more. So if there's like 300 billion roughly of, stable coins out there today, I've seen, people predict 10x, 3 trillion, in 5 years. And that goes back to tying in two themes, like an overnight success after many years. It's after one big person decides to start doing it, and stablecoins, by the way, was the lubricant for the DeFi ecosystem. And when it takes off, it'll be the lubricant for the real world assets as well. And so you just need one big person to start on the demand side, not just on the issuance side. And this thing can really take off.
Yeah, I'm really curious about the volume and liquidity points you brought up, because obviously for you guys as Avalanche, it's okay to have or it's beneficial to have 400 L1s, right? Because the value is still being driven back to securing the network, and sort of everybody benefits. High tide, all boats, all that. If I compare that to like a stablecoin issuer, a Circle can issue on 12 different chains and be pretty agnostic about, the volume on this specific one or that specific one. But I want to get your thoughts on the native stable coins and where we're going with this with, does everybody get a stable coin, right? How do you think that volume game will play out? Or do you think that demand actually will grow that exponentially, that there's sort of sufficient liquidity for all these ecosystems on that side of things?
I think with every single technology that I've invested in over time, it starts out with a lot of generalized purpose technology, and then it narrows into more vertical specific use case technology. That's going to happen with the LLMs in AI as well. You have these big guys now competing with general LLMs. Ultimately, it's going to be more curated, AI systems, if you will. I think as we move forward, the competitive advantage will lean more and more towards existing networks and people who have collateral. If rules are 100% clear, the edge will be who has the largest network or who has the collateral to issue the stablecoin. What I think you'll see is Tether and Circle will find their place because they're so big already in certain areas. And other areas, you're going to see the equivalent of a JP Morgan coin because you just can't, beat a network that's that big already. And with existing technologists working on things that has a business proposition from day one.
Do you see JP Morgan coin or indeed Connexus ever migrating to a public blockchain, John? Just because I feel like
that's a great question. I will watch Zelle. If Zelle really opens up and it becomes more like Venmo, then the answer is yes, but I doubt it.
Yeah, someone had a great analogy that really just made my brain understand it more the other day. They said, compare a walled garden blockchain concept to the way that IT companies used to think about cloud storage many years ago, right? Everybody used to think as cloud storage, they wanted to have their cloud storage, private. And now everybody puts their cloud storage on, AWS and Azure. So it's all open and public. But blockchains have not reached that level yet. So maybe they will one day, but it's, that's not the case at the moment.
One day.
One day.
Yeah. Do you kind of see on the TradFi front, John, the convergence of TradFi and DeFi? Are they more alike than people think, or is it still very, very separate? I see Gerald laughing. Why are you laughing?
Great question. No, I'm excited about the answer.
Okay, yeah. All right, let's go, John. Yeah.
The science or art of financing things, capital formation, exchanging or trading that, value around, that is, in theory, have nothing to do with technology. It could run on any rail. The issue is you have to embed the safety measures into the system. And right now, the regulators and the risk mitigators and the security is done through intermediaries. What I see over time is because, blockchain and other technology is programmable, the business logic, the risk mitigators, the security is all going to be embedded into the code itself. And therefore, there will be differentiation from service levels. And I look at this like credit cards. A lot of people use Amex and for a reason. It's more expensive, not only to the consumer, I'm talking about to the merchant, 2.5%, 3% versus, debit cards, which is very cheap, or, even a Visa, MasterCard. From a consumer perspective, you like the white glove service. You like the fact that there is a large loyalty reward programs there. You like the fact that when someone stole your identity and is trying to use it somewhere else, they have insurance and they will negate the trade, so to speak, and take the pain away from you. That is a different proposition from a complete DIY do-it-yourself thing. So again, I just think there's going to be many flavors in many of these developments, and there's enough room for more than one player.
Yeah, I'm really curious. We have a lot of conversations internally about more traditional institutional products, things that are regulated. And then often, of course, sitting in my seat, we have to talk a lot about what that would require from like a back office perspective versus, something DeFi where you just, you're kind of launching the chain and you got your pool set up and you see how it goes. We're also talking an interesting time from an M&A perspective. MasterCard, I believe, is acquiring Zero Hash. We've seen quite a bit of traditional financial players just go buy rails, to sort of hop into the space.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, do you think that trend will continue? Do you think those traditional players will actually be able to integrate with these types of products? Where do you see that going?
Well, the trend is going to continue for a little bit of time. I don't know how long, but it's definitely going to continue. Again, similar to other industries I've invested in or operated in, basically, there's a tipping point where all of these, call it existing players, are making a choice of build, buy, partner, depending on their priority of speed or resources. Since money is relatively cheap, even though it's more expensive today than it was 4 or 5 years ago, because interest rates are a little bit higher, there is a race to, once Stripe decided to go buy Bridge and Privy, it's not coincidental that Visa said, I know what you're doing, so I need to get speed to market as well. And what we're seeing there happening, obviously, they have, Visa already has partnerships for stablecoins with us and a few other chains. And now that with Zero Hash, they'll be able to effectuate that even faster in a compliant way. So I think you're going to see more and more of these, call it, not traditional, but more and more of these, call it crypto enabling infrastructure type companies get bought by the big players for a period of time, just so they can get to market fast, because there is a race. It's no different from it doesn't make sense that everyone is spending so much on AI CapEx, right? But they're in a race with each other, worried that, if they don't do it, they'll be left out of the game completely in the long run. And that's what's happening here with, call it the technology finance space.
Yeah, John, I agree with you on that. When it's like, why build it and take years when you could just acquire a really good business and go ahead and run off with it, right?
And money is relatively cheap, and valuations in the space have come down a bit. Maybe they should come down a little more, but it's a good time for acquirers. Yeah.
Is Avalanche looking to, or I guess Ava Labs looking to acquire any businesses?
We're always looking at things. If anything makes sense, we will. We have done ones in the past, small ones, tuck-ins, if you will, and they've been very successful. We're also very cognizant that once you do these things, the bigger they get. Don't forget, like Zero Hash is tiny to a MasterCard or Visa in terms of enterprise value, and people as well. So they can absorb that culture and the integration easily. For normal sized companies, you have to think about, and as an operator, you have to think about the culture of the firm and the integration and make sure it all works out besides just whether it's cheap enough to buy or not.
John, you have a unique perspective on everything we've talked about because of your background. You are sort of the prime example of suits to hoodies, the analogy, or the stereotype, I guess you'd call it. But I think our listeners would be keen to kind of hear your story. We like to talk to our guests and kind of get a sense of who they are as well. I know you have a background on Wall Street, but can you just give us a sense of, who John Woo was before Ava Labs?
So John Woo always loved technology. And even as a kid, I was always the first one to get whatever latest gadget or whatever to try it out. I just loved innovation. And I wanted to be a tech investor after college and business school. So I went into a field, worked with great firms where I got to invest in great trends from, the beginning of search engines to basically e-commerce to mobile to social SaaS products and all of that. And I love identifying areas early. And then I identified crypto. First, it was just Bitcoin as an investor. Frankly, I'll be honest, the first time I looked at it, I went to some of these meetups. I didn't think too much of it, but then I realized that in this investment, given the fixed supply of Bitcoin and doing the math on the demand side, the incremental demand was just so much more than incremental supply. So, first got into space as a curious person. And then when I saw in 2017 the ICO boom, that's when I really got involved and said, wow, this could be done in a security manner. And I was actually trying to solve a problem for myself. So the first operator gig I had wasn't that running and helping start Avalanche. It was basically I was CEO of the digital assets group at Shares Post. I was trying to take private securities, tokenizing them, using an ATS and making it compliant so that individuals could get access to back then Airbnb, Lyft, and Uber, who were private companies. So as a tech investor, when I was at large firms, I had access to those venture rounds. All of a sudden, as an individual, I didn't. So I was like, how do I solve this? And then I saw the ICO boom, and I thought it was a better, faster, cheaper way to for capital formation and to get access and to have an application that can provide access to individuals. And so that's how I've been on this journey of real world access or utility for a long time. That's how I got into it. And then, when crypto kitties halted, prices spiked on Ethereum, Gun, the founder of Ava Labs, and I were friends from before even that. And we talked about it. And he's like, me and my 2 PhD students are going to create a new consensus that's going to help try to solve the trilemma. And that's how it all began.
Yeah.
Crypto kitties. I knew I liked you, John.
Classic. Way back. I'm gonna cheat a little bit here and ask 2 quick questions because I think it's really interesting. Like, I was smiling when you were talking about this sort of trying to get private shares, whether it's on chain or off chain, just that liquidity in those private markets. I was a venture partner at Republic back in the day and have been obsessed with kind of just the whether it's accrediteds or secondaries or whatever. So it's a very interesting area. So my first question is, other than direct purchase of like the asset, do you remember what the first check you wrote into a like blockchain exposed sort of company was? And then the second one is, I would love your thoughts on these instruments like mirror tokens or like what Robinhood is doing, trying to tokenize some of these assets, but it seems like in a very sort of roundabout way as far as like what the rights actually are that people are getting.
All right, so there's a couple of questions. Which one should I answer first?
The combo.
First check.
Yeah.
So my personal first check into a blockchain company?
Yeah, is it whether it was through your fund or personally? Yeah.
Okay, so I remember this distinctly. It was brought to me, an angel round for Coinbase was brought to me. Now, it's actually not answering your question in a weird way because I actually didn't invest, but that was brought to me. And the reason I didn't invest in that angel round for Coinbase was because I said, for this thing to work, and that was so early, it was really just Bitcoin running around. For this to work, Bitcoin's got to work. So why don't I just go directly into Bitcoin? So that was, I guess, the first check, if you will. And that was my entree into this space.
You bought Bitcoin.
And the second question was?
Yeah. What do you think of this? The way companies like Republic and Robinhood are trying to get exposure through tokens to private market secondaries and things like that.
Okay, so let's go about Republic because they've been doing this longer than Robinhood. I think a lot of people have been trying to figure out some gizmo to give access to at least the accredited, if not other people, more retail. And I think what people don't realize, because especially if you're a young engineer and having done it now for so long, it's not necessarily a technology solve that ultimately will solve the issue. It is really a societal, a social awareness, and also the regulation rules. These private companies don't want more than 3,000 people on the cap table. They want to control the cap table. So there's a lot of things that they have to figure out hurdles over before they can actually effectuate something like that. There are other ways of doing it. Republic had its own creative ways of doing it. Even, larger companies have created effectively ETFs trying to do it. So there's so many ways of trying to use the existing. It's almost like a structured game. They're trying to structure ways that are legal and compliant to give access to this stuff. I think going forward, one of the benefits going forward is that the SEC chair is, I think, dead set on getting more access to retail. And that may be basically allowing IPOs to happen in a more efficient manner, if you will. So we've seen the public markets in the U.S. go from something like 8,000 securities down to like 4,000 or 5,000 in the last 20, 25 years. And that's because companies are staying private longer because they don't have to deal with some of the issues. When I was in business school, I was taught, there's a illiquid discount that you should have. But yet somehow, these private companies in theory trade higher than their public comps now these days. So that just is an indication that we need to change the system a little bit so that individuals can get access faster.
No, it's definitely happening. We've mentioned this a couple of times on the show, but Paul Atkins has said, he wants to make IPOing cool again. He actually just praised the way that the ETFs kind of use that legal, I wouldn't say it as a loophole, but legal method to take the Solana and the HBAR and Litecoin ETFs public with the no delay.
That was a loophole and with the shutdown. That was definitely a loophole
with the shutdown. Yeah. But actually a public company used that loophole to go public during the shutdown too. And Chair Atkins was like, all power to you. So he was actually really on board with that, which to your point.
Because it fits into the theme of, getting more IPOs so that the retail can get access to this stuff sooner than later. And I think it's a reversal of trend, which is good. It can also, just like a pendulum, it can swing too hard, as well. So I do believe though that, you need to make sure that investing is investing and gambling is gambling, and you don't conflate the two, and you do need to protect the consumer. And again, like all of these rules that are very difficult to deal with for entrepreneurs today, they were put in place with good intention. Some of them 90 years old, obviously. So I applaud the agencies and the administration for pushing things forward. I just hope they do it in a careful way.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been a great episode, John. To wrap things up, aside from everything we discussed today, what's the one thing that you're watching either in DC or elsewhere that you think others should be paying attention to?
Well, I think this is more like a combination of things. So there's public things I look at, and there's things that I look at because I'm an operator and I work with companies. So I can only talk about not the deals that have not been mentioned through Avalanche, but I'll give you two answers. One from an operational perspective and the types of people that we're talking to. I'm very excited about how many, call it traditional enterprises, both Wall Street and call it, companies that you're aware of, but, not necessarily Wall Street companies, are looking and talking to us about creating some sort of deal or partnership. I'm very excited about that internally, but I can't give specifics. Externally, I'm obviously looking at the market structure built. There's no time. We're looking at difference between Senate and the House and all of that. So I'm trying to follow the details. And a little plug for Eleanor. I think if everyone just watches her handle, they'll be second to the answer because Eleanor will be first.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And then you can look at my Twitter because then I'll retweet it.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure, John. Thank you so much for coming on. And we will have you back on again for sure. And hopefully see you in London next year. Are you guys having the conference again in London or are you having it at a different place?
I'm not sure it's
Alpha.
100% decided, but we will always have it at a cool place.
Yeah.
And we
Okay.
look forward to having you.
We really
Awesome.
enjoyed that. That was our first trip as a group together and definitely a
Awesome.
memorable trip.
Great. That's great to hear. You guys are great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Take care.